بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. So continuing on from the introduction of Imam Nawawi, the Sheikh says, فصل ينبغي أن يكون الذاكر على أكمل الصفات, that it is necessary for dhikr. Well, not necessary. Yambaghi doesn't just mean necessary. In different contexts, it means different things. Here what he's saying is that we should do our utmost, do the best, try your level best to be in as perfect a state as you can be in to engage with dhikr. فَإِنْ كَانَ جَالِسًا فِي مَوْضِعٍ اسْتَقْبَلَ الْقِبْلَةِ. If you find that during this dhikr, and whatever that dhikr may be, so last week we spoke about studying knowledge, sacred knowledge is a type of dhikr, and there's many hadiths which indicate that actually it's the best type of dhikr. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on occasion he saw a group of Sahaba doing, the group circles of Sahaba sitting in the masjid. Then he went to the first group and said, asked them what they're doing, and they said, we're remembering Allah. And to another group, they were discussing, and then he asked them what they were doing. They said, we're learning. And he went and he sat with the people that were learning, which tells us both of these are types of dhikr. So many of the ulama would, the great influential Muslims of the past spoke about this topic as to what's more preferable, and on the whole they agreed based on a number of hadiths, some of which are weak, and there are many fabricated narrations on this too, but a number of hadiths suggest that actually learning knowledge is the greatest form of dhikr overall. And the reason for that is for somebody to engage with learning about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then acting upon that. So there is a caveat here, which is it's not just the act of learning, it's the act of learning and then trying to act upon it. It's a question I get fairly regularly from students who have spent 6 months to a year studying ilm, and we have this crisis of conscience. I feel like I'm not progressing spiritually, or I'm not progressing at the rate I was progressing before, and how do I manage that? So there seems to be this expectation that with the exponential growth of your understanding or knowledge, that somehow your act of ibadah would follow suit, and that simply just doesn't happen that way. It's not how we were designed. Knowledge is something that initially when you do it, it's very stimulating. You learn, and and you want to act upon it, and then there comes a point where the amount of stuff that you've come to learn, you physically can't act upon all of it without there being a cost, and sometimes a bigger cost than you're willing to pay. I think that's why the ulama, and Allahu Alam is a reflection, but I think the ulama were very adamant, and the early tabi'een and the Sahaba, the tabi'een at least, spoke about this, that somebody is considered a sheikh when they reach 40. You're considered a juniorish scholar at the age of 40, and prior to that you're considered a talib al-ilm, a student of knowledge. In fact, Imam Nawawi radiallahu anh famously referred to himself as a talib al-ilm. So he called himself a student of knowledge all his life. He didn't like the title Muhyiddin that was given to him, which is the reviver of the deen. He saw it as it was too ostentatious. He didn't feel like he deserved it. And when people refer to him as a scholar, he'd say, no, I'm just a student of knowledge. I'm a nobody type attitude. There was an understanding that it's not just about gaining information, because you can take a lot of data in. It's what you do with it, and actually what time buys you. So you can have two people that have different rates of learning. So one person can absorb a lot of information, and that's great for them, and somebody else takes a long time to absorb information. It takes them probably weeks or months to absorb the same information that somebody else may take a few days to be able to absorb, as in to soak up and be able to regurgitate back. But it may also be that the person who soaks it in quickly takes a lot longer to synthesize it and make true sense of it, because what they've done is they were able to bring it all in, but actually the unpicking and deciphering what's useful and what's not, and how it all hangs together in your mind or in your heart, that's not an easy task. It's not something that's done in 2 days. Whereas the person who probably takes a week or 2 weeks or a month or however long are doing it, are probably doing it at the same time. So they're both taking it in and trying to synthesize and make sense of it, and almost a bit like, if I'm cleaning out a room, in my mind, I just need to get stuff out of there and I've got to move it here. So I just start chucking it out. Whereas my wife might look at it and say, well, that's very inefficient. Why would you do that? Why not spend the extra 30 seconds and look at the item that you're moving and ask yourself, where can I best place it so my life's a lot easier? And we just think very differently with that. And I know that's fine, say in the end, usually the case she's right. But it's an inefficiency for some people who don't think that way. It can appear like we just need to take it all in. Or random things like if I'm shopping, I'll just grab stuff and throw it in a bag. Whereas my wife might look at it and think, okay, the cold products have to go into this bag, and then the stuff that goes here, the fruits and salads go into this bag, and it's very organized. And that's a bit like, I think, taking in information, that some people are just very disorganized in taking it in. They're very good at taking it in, but actually when it comes to routing, cleansing and cleaning and deciding what works and what doesn't work and what fits together and what doesn't, and what you can use and what you can't use, is there's a lot of chaos in there, and they take a lot longer to process that and make sense of it. And that works for them, that works for those people, and that's fine. Whereas the others might take a lot longer and actually be frustrated by that, that it takes them so long. But what they are doing is they're organizing that beautiful room in there, that mansion in their head, and placing everything where it needs to be. So regardless of whether you take stuff in quickly or whether you're somebody that takes a long time on it, both groups, in terms of being able to make sense of that, that knowledge, and determining what is kind of in that hierarchy in their head, what is good, what's useful, and what needs to be kicked down the road, kicking the can down the road type thing, takes a long time. Which is why the scholars saw it as, you spend your youth amassing information, you're basically throwing everything in, you're like a sponge. But it takes years of training and suhbah, which is company, around spending time with people who think differently to you, which is an extremely critical part of knowledge. It's an extremely critical part. The worst thing that you can do is to be around people who think the same as you, who behave the same as you, probably have the same allegiances as you. When you do that, all you do is you create an echo chamber of people who tell you that you're right, and the reason why they tell you you're right is because they're right, to them, and you're just validating each other's thoughts. Whereas what you really want to do is you want to be around people who can then challenge your thinking, challenge your mindset, and it may be uncomfortable, but actually you learn a lot more. That's called a growth mindset, where you're looking always to develop, and successful people do that. People who run successful organizations never spend time or too much time with in their comfort zone. And I remember there's somebody I look up to, who runs quite a big organization, and I asked her this question as to how does she stay on top of it all, and she said to me, she has a coach that helps her organize things in her head, and what's fascinating was, she said she never keeps the same coach for more than 8 weeks. So after 8 sessions, she changes her coach. And the reason for that is she said it takes about 8 sessions before they start nodding and agreeing with you. Up until that point, they're almost having to prove themselves. They're much more challenging. They're trying to understand you, genuinely trying to understand you. And once they've got you, and which she thought it took about 8 sessions, and once they've understood you, it becomes more of a relationship, and they start agreeing with you. And she found that actually that is, in the grand scheme of things, that's not good for her, because she's not getting what she wants out of it. So true ilm means you have to be uncomfortable a lot. You have to be around people who challenge your views. And if you can't be around those people, your suhbah is in the form of books, be in the company of books, learn, educate yourself, or in, use YouTube. I'm not, I think there's a massive movement out there that somehow, um, by watching YouTube and learning knowledge from the internet, that somehow we're losing, um, we're losing this book knowledge, and that's a bad thing. And it may well be a bad thing, but I'm sure people said that when they stopped memorizing and started writing. This is a age-old, um, a give and take relationship where when technology comes in, you have to give something up to gain something. That's just the fact of the matter. When calculators first came out, everyone said, well, not even when they first came out, when they became mainstream in schools, everyone said, oh, children won't be able to count on their fingers anymore. And the argument for calculators was, why do they need to? They've got calculators. And the people who said the calculators are a bad thing said, because they're losing the ability to do arithmetic in their minds, and that's a skill. So they were focused more on the skill than they were on the objective, whereas the calculator is more about the objective, getting to what you need, which is, I just need some sums and I need them quickly. I don't need to work them out in my head. So there's always been a give and take about these sorts of things. So my personal view is that you should use whatever means you have available to you to learn, to educate yourself, to do dhikr, but everything has a limit, and I think there comes a point where you have to, and you've got to be careful about that. So I think when you're learning ilm, when you're going beyond the really basic, the norm, the seerah and so on and so forth, you need to then start thinking about credentials. Who is it that's teaching you? When you're taking your deen from somebody, as the Sahaba would say, فَانْظُرُوا عَمَّنْ تَأْخُذُونَ دِينَكُمْ. Be wary of who you're taking your deen from. When you're looking at matters of belief, and these sorts of things, then you have to obviously be very careful and be selective over who you learn from. But you can do that. I mean, these things are available online. You can easily read somebody's biography, and it may well be out of date, like many of mine are. Actually, I've got biographies that go back to 2010. So he says you have to be in the sorry, let me take a step back. So what I was talking about is this age of 40. So there's this real emphasis, and it has been historically for many, many years. The scholars they've written books on this, which is that synthesis takes a long time, and in scholarship it takes up to the age of 40. But the assumption is that actually you started quite young. So they think it takes about 20 to 30 years of a combined actual study, rigor, and good company, people who raise your standards, people who challenge your worldview. And people who teach you through their very being, like they used to say about Imam Ahmad, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, one of the founders of the four schools. They used to say that he would have 5,000 people in his gatherings, and then Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda, who wrote a commentary on a work by Imam al-Muhasibi, he commented, and I can't remember the exact number, but something along the lines of only about a handful of them would have a notepad in their hand. Meaning he said the remaining X number of thousand would come just to learn from looking at him. So they used to say that Imam Ahmad's mannerisms were itself something, an act of ibadah, almost you could learn and you can gain just by watching the way he conducted himself. And there are people out there like that. There's even today there are people that we can learn a huge amount from just by being in their company. Ibn Ata'illah Sikandari rahimahullah says, in one of his hikam, but also in his Taj al-Arus, he said the men of God are, he said, they affect you not by their word, they affect you by their state. I can't remember the exact quote, but he says a man, and a man here in this context means somebody, in the context of the soul, when they say a man, what they mean is somebody who is a godly person. And they would refer to even, they'd say a woman is ar-rajul. In Arabic, the word means the man, but it actually means somebody who is, has conviction, somebody who has conviction, and that could be, when it comes to with God, they'd say that she was like that, she was a man in that regard. So he said a man is not a person who affects you with his words. It's a person who affects you. It's a person who affects you with with his state. What he was talking about there was people who, just by being in their presence, spending a bit of time with them, you can learn so much from them. And if you've been around people who have a lot of experience, you'll know that they can say such profound things, or sometimes it's what they don't say that you can learn so much from. It's not the words that they use necessarily. It's just how, it's the timing of those words or the timing of those pauses, which are packed with their history, everything about them. And I know I've been around those people, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, that I have sat with or I've been in the presence of, and I felt like I could write an entire book listening to their half an hour lecture. Or I can watch them from a distance in a non-creepy way, but I can watch them from a distance, and I can learn from the way they are. There are people like that out there, and I don't. Then they're not few in number. There's a lot of people out there that we can learn a great deal from. So these things take time. So somebody who is 25 years old and just about learned how to get dressed themselves and make themselves breakfast, they're not a scholar. We may use the word scholar for them. That, and some scholars may give them the title out of respect, and just given the tragedy that we're facing, which is that everyone seems to have this title. Um, it's it's more about directing people to somebody that at least can in some way benefit them. Yeah. So person X is called a scholar because, not because they have earned the title scholar, but because person Y and Z, who are not deserving of that word at all and are probably misguiding people, also have the same title. And in the mind of the layman, they follow the title. If they don't know your biography, they don't know your pedigree, they don't know who you are and your background, they're going to follow the title. And they hear the word imam, they assume, they make assumptions. Understandably, they make assumptions about a person's level of knowledge. So these things are often used, and you will come across them. And I'm not trying to dismiss people who may have that title and who are well on the way of deserving it. So it's more like bita'wili ma ya'ul, as they say, as my teacher used to say, which is you call somebody a scholar because it's like a dua for them that inshallah, if they carry on the way they are, that they'll become a scholar. So it's something that happens gradually. This is real knowledge happens gradually. And because that happens, when we're taking information in and we're thinking, why am I not acting upon it? Because you're taking information in, that's not knowledge yet. What you've got to synthesize it, that takes time. And at the age of 40, or 40 is a number, but the point is, when you've sat on that knowledge for long enough, and you've been in good company for long enough, you will then start to decipher and decide more accurately, more appropriately, what is good for your soul and what isn't good for your soul. So when you're 22, it seems the right thing to do to stay up and read Nafal. It sometimes takes until you're 28 to realize that was a stupid thing to do because you missed all your fajrs. Yeah, it doesn't happen straight away. It takes time, because what it needs to do is it needs to kind of weed out all the Sayyidina Ali used to say, he said, youthfulness is junoon. Sayyidina Ali said, radiyallahu anhu, he said, youth is a type of madness. It completely befogs you. You can be convinced and absolutely convinced by something, and just given another 10 years to sit on it, your view would be completely different. And I've learned from that, because one of the things that I try to do is, and I use it more so in work now. I have it's a principle, a tool that I try and follow, which is I never speak in the first meeting, because I realize sometimes there's things that have already been said and understood. And by speaking up in that first meeting, I'm probably haven't given myself enough to synthesize it. So I wait till the second meeting. And I found it so beneficial, because there are times I want to say something, but actually I can walk away and think, I'm glad I didn't say it. You can't regret what you didn't say. But when you're young, it's very hard to be able to fight that impulse to want to speak up and to correct everything that seems to be wrong in the world, and this kind of attitude of wanting to solve the world's problems. But the problem is, if you can't make your own bed, the bottom line is you're not solving anybody else's problems, no matter how much you convince yourself that you can and that you will. And that takes time to be able to really get hold of. So the ibadah comes slowly. And I'm not saying one shouldn't strive to do it. One should absolutely strive, but not feel like it's not the right thing to do, to study, just because their exponential growth of their knowledge isn't quite exponentially being followed by the level of ibadah. That's not going to happen. But hopefully, when you've gained enough and you've learnt and you've been around good company, there will come that next phase in your life where you will want to put it into practice. They say about one of Imam Abu Hanifa's students, which many people won't have even heard of. His name was Dawood, Dawood al-Ta'i. He was actually one of the most senior students of Abu Hanifa, and the one that's not even mentioned in the books. He's not really considered amongst the. You won't really come across these opinions in fiqh. Um, he was considered even the teacher for Abu Yusuf, who was the student of Abu Yusuf, who's considered one of the most senior students of Abu Yusuf, Abu Hanifa. So you had Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, you had Imam Zufar, who was also a very senior student of Abu Hanifa and actually took over the madhab, so to speak, after the passing of Abu Hanifa. But they all looked to Dawood, they all looked at this Imam al-Ta'i, because they saw him as a senior student that often say he was very much an introvert, and he liked to keep himself to himself. He learnt a great deal, and they used to watch him in class and just see the way he approaches an answer, and they were just completely amazed by this student. But they say one day Imam Dawood came to Sayyidina Abu Hanifa and said, "I've learned all this, what shall I do now?" And Imam Abu Hanifa said, "Now act upon it. Now act upon it." And they say he never stepped foot in a classroom again. Yeah, Allahu alam to the particulars of this story, but they say he never stepped foot in a classroom again because he spent the rest of his life acting upon it. So when people thought he'd spend 6 months a year, he realized that he can spend his whole lifetime, he'll never finish doing what he was, what he had learned. And then there's snippets of his stories. He became a great mystic. There's these snippets of how he lived his life. So one of the things that we know about him, rahimahullah, is that when he passed away, it was then that his wife found out that he'd been fasting most of his life. So what he used to do was he would rahimahullah, his wife would make him, out of love, she would make him lunch every single day, and he would collect the lunch and he wouldn't tell her, and he would take it into to his he would go out, and then he would just hold on to it. So she was convinced he had been eating it, and it took till the end of his life when he passed away that she realized, they say, that he had been fasting most of his life. So that's how private he was, that he didn't share that with many people. And they say that often whenever Abu Yusuf got stuck on a question, he would try and convince Dawood al-Ta'i to give him the answer. And he would sometimes follow him down the road, asking him these questions in the hope that he'd answer it, and he would kind of just brush it off because he didn't want to get too involved. But that's and you have these sorts of anecdotes of great scholars who suddenly just stopped and then went into their own. Imam Ghazali is another very famous example of a man that did that, who spent much of his early life studying and mastering and memorizing, and then he just paused and he had this crisis of conscience that, what am I going to do with this? And he left. He went on this great journey, some of which is we still don't know much about today, other than there's the account of, they say that the way they found him was that there was somebody who was sent to look for this great man, Imam Ghazali, to ask him a question. And so this guy went looking everywhere for Imam Ghazali and ended up in this restroom. And he was just just either thinking out loud or whatever it was that he was doing. And there's a man cleaning, and he said, "Oh, who are you looking for?" He said, "I'm looking for this great man, the Hujjatul Islam al-Ghazali," not knowing that the man that was cleaning the bathroom was actually the toilet was actually the Imam Ghazali himself. So he's, Allahu Alam, again, to the details of these stories. I've not really ever researched much into them. But these are well-known anecdotes about the likes of Imam Ghazali and others who spent much of their life studying, and then they had this crisis and they realized that actually I'm not going to find God in the books anymore. And the reason for that is not because you can't. It's because there comes a point where you realize I need to break away. There's a danger that I might get sucked in by my own ego, where when I'm reading about God, what I'm actually doing is indulging in myself. And they had this experience that who am I doing this for, and what benefit am I gaining? How am I spiritually, being benefited by this? And people like Imam Ghazali, they kind of stopped and left. Although he did make a return, because when the need was there, the man was there. So he did kind of leave his khalwa and come back to his his posts. So there are accounts like this, but I think our young, tender age, with the very limited knowledge and experience that we have, it's not something that we should worry too much about, and allow nature to take its course. Over time, just have a good intention, and to always strive to do a bit more than you did yesterday. And if that's too much, then do it more than you did a year ago, or a week ago, or a month ago, whatever's comfortable for you. Just always make sure that the trajectory of your spiritual life is not plateaued. That's the worst thing you can do. Don't just be the same as you were 2 years ago. Try and strive to be higher, but actually take yourself to task for it. The thing that people say, and some of you may think this, that what if you feel like you're worse off than you were 2 years ago? Don't base it on your own opinion of yourself, because people who have a high opinion of themselves will think that they if you're a Donald Trump, if there's a Donald Trump in all of us, unfortunately, which is a sad thing. It's called an ego. So some of us have it, that can be, we have a conflated view of ourselves, which means, and that's a very elevated view, to think that we're always progressing because we're doing. So we can really put all of our kind of eggs into this one basket, which is I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So the doers. And then you've got the other group that no matter what they do, they just feel like it's never enough. And the more they do, the less fulfilled they feel. And then if you ask them where they are, they might say, I feel like I'm worse off. Trouble is, none of these are based on anything real. It's all on your own view of yourself. And that comes down to your own perception of yourself. If you're a confident person, your stance will be very different to somebody who probably isn't so as confident. So take yourself to task with these things by actually writing it down. Write down, be positive about it. So what did you do that went well? So this year, this week, this month, this day, this hour, what have I done that actually was good? Yeah. And don't just write it down and celebrate it. It's not supposed to be a celebration of your good deeds. It's about when you've written it down, take a moment to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for every one of those. The spirituality is in the belief that each one of those good things was from God and it wasn't from you. Thank Allah for them. And then look at the things that you didn't do so well, things that you that were wrong. Maybe not even what you did, but what you thought. That's they say that the people take themselves to task for what they do, and the awliya take themselves to task for what they think and what they feel. So just take yourself to task. If there's something really bothering you that day, write it down, reflect on it. Why did it bother me? And really break it down into its granular detail, 4 or 5 points on that one thing. What is it exactly about it? And the thing is, you need to break away from this ego, which is no one else is going to see it. So be honest with yourself. Tell yourself the thing you already know, not the thing that you want to believe or the thing that you want other people to know, because that's easy to do. You do that all the time. We're great at putting a face on, which is going out and putting our best foot forward and being the person that everyone wants us to be. That's easy to do. There's an expectation that I behave a certain way, I look a certain way, I speak a certain way, and I happily live up to that. But the thing is, when you're on your own in that moment, writing your personal diary that's personal to you, after you've done it, rip it up if you want. Nobody has to see it. And it doesn't have to be a collation of your thoughts. You don't have to write a personal diary. If you want to, by all means do. But the point isn't about eternalizing it on paper. The point is about you going through the motions of taking yourself to task and being more on point about what exactly is it that you're not, that the issue here is. Otherwise, you'll fall into this trap of either being overconfident or underselling yourself, which is both problematic. Let's continue from where we left off then. فصل أن يكون الذاكر لأكمل الصفات فإن كان جالسا في موضع استقبل القبلة وجلس متذللا متخشعا بسكينة ووقار مطرقا رأسه ولو ذكر لغير هذه الأحوال جاز ولا كراهة في حقه لكن إن كان بغير عذر كان تاركا للأفضل. He says that if somebody is sitting down, so this section is on the optimal things to do when you are remembering God. He says if you are sitting down, to just make an effort to face the Qibla, to make an effort to face the Qibla. This has been a tradition from way back when. The Tabi'een are there are narrations of the Tabi'een making a point of doing this. In terms of the reverence that we have for the direction for the Qibla, in terms of its symbolic nature, has always been there, whether it be doing dhikr or whether it be having classes or anything like that, meaning outside of what is obligatory, because the salah is only valid if it's facing the Qibla, assuming you know that you're facing the Qibla. For example, if somebody was facing a different direction, not aware that it's not the Qibla, and they completed the prayer, then there's no problem in the Hanafi madhab. That prayer is still valid. Yeah, that prayer is still valid. But where somebody knows that the direction in which they're facing is not the Qibla, then that prayer would not be considered valid. And by not the Qibla, what it means is a completely different direction. So it's not even in the general direction of the Qibla. Yeah. There's only one place on earth where you can pray in any direction. Yeah, it's inside the Kaaba. Inside the Kaaba is the only place where you can literally face whichever direction you want. Anywhere outside of that, so even when you're outside facing the Kaaba, you have to face the Kaaba. Yeah, but when you're inside it, you can face in any direction. So it's always been a place of reverence, and historically, classes used to be held outside of the Kaaba. To this day, I mean, there are some classes that are held, but they're all state-approved classes. But historically, although they were in the Ottoman state-approved, there used to be classes for each of the different madhabs. So there used to be a section, and there used to actually be there would be a signpost there for people, the Malikiya, or for the Shafi'is, or for the Hanafis, and so on. And they'd have their own classes, their own durus happening there, and even they had their own imam and so on. So that was quite for centuries that was the case until more recently, over the last couple of 100 years, where that was lost. So it's been a place of reverence, not just for obligatory prayers, but also for like I said, supererogatory things that we do. So one of the things that the scholars would do is, so in the subcontinent, for instance, we say you can't even put your feet towards the Qibla. It's not haram to do that. Yeah, just make it clear. This is something that we kind of brought up and taught that we shouldn't do, which is put your feet towards the Qibla, or things like that. And the truth is, there's nothing impermissible about it. Yeah. In fact, if somebody had to sit and pray, and there's a type of prayer, there's at least one scenario where you would be obliged to pray with your feet facing the Qibla. Yeah. If somebody did not have enough clothes to cover themselves, they'd have to sit in the most covering way, which means that they'd have to have their legs facing the Qibla, sitting down, and be completely tucked in as much as possible. They'd be facing they'd have to face the Qibla. So, and it's very much, you find it in the subcontinent, but there are other cultures that just don't see that at all. So you can go to parts of the world where it's perfectly normal. In fact, it's the norm that people sit in that way. So this is very much a kind of cultural thing, but it's connected to religion in that it comes from reverence. It's a very sensible and sincere place. So, you certainly wouldn't tell somebody not to do that, and tell somebody off for making that point. But just so that you're aware that this is not necessarily something, you don't have to figure out which direction the Qibla is and then not put your feet towards it. Now, the basis for it in terms of historically why the scholars kind of seem to have emphasized this, especially amongst the Hanafis, is people like Abu Hanifa, for example, would never put his feet towards his teacher's house. Yeah. So according to some of the people that wrote about Abu Hanifa's life, so a biography of Abu Hanifa, they said throughout his teacher's life, he would never stretch his legs out towards his teacher's house out of respect for him. So this idea that stretching your legs out, it was disrespectful. So it's not the act of the feet facing the teacher. It was more about the kind of having that relaxed attitude. I suppose the feet thing is also some of the symbolic because of the fact that you walk on those feet and then you have those same feet, the bottom of those feet, the soles of your feet facing your teacher's house. So there are reports like that we find of Abu Hanifa, and for that reason, it's become a tradition that seems to follow the predominantly the Hanafis of not doing so, because if that's your teacher's house, you never do that. And certainly the Kaaba is the most revered place in the universe, alongside the other haram, which is the resting place of the Prophet. Both of these things are the center of the universe. So certainly you wouldn't then you'd expect that actually Abu Hanifa would not have put his feet towards the Qibla by extension. So that's where it comes from. But as I said, it's not a religious necessarily thing in the sense that it's not haram to do so. But but where somebody does it, there's absolutely no doubt, where somebody does it mockingly or does it in a careless way where they don't care. If someone says, I don't care, it's a Qibla and does it, then that would probably fall under makruh. That would be makruh, because what that's saying is that that's mocking something which is mocking reverence, yeah, and that's not something that you would be appropriate. So therefore, it would be probably fall under karaha for that reason. Lakin in kana he says you should sit down, face the Qibla where possible. وَجَلَسَ مُتَذَلِّلًا, and sit in a way that is mutadallil, means in a humble way. Yeah, to sit in a as humble way as possible. Mutakhashi'an, and in a way that shows your respect or fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. Bisakina. So sit in a way, in other words, don't have your head and your chest out. Yeah, that's the starting point. It's not really something that you would do when you're remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What you're not doing is trying to show yourself up as having your chest out, because that's a stance where you're taking somebody on. Yeah, kind of evolutionarily speaking, what we're doing when we're sticking our chest out is we're basically trying to match up to somebody that's in front of us. So when you're before God, you don't want to be standing up with your chest out. What you want to be doing is actually kind of maybe settling into yourself a bit more and seeing your place as being a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what they mean by mutadallil and mutakhashi'an. Bisakina, and also be relaxed, because part of that is when you've got your chest down, so there's a lot of pretense to that. But where you can just completely just settle in, so that, and the reason why you relax is not to become lazy or to just really sit in a way. Relaxed doesn't mean careless. Relaxed means that you're not thinking about your posture. You're not so worried about those sorts of details, or being in a certain way or looking a certain way, or you don't want to be worrying about those things. When you want to enter a state of dhikr, you need to make sure that you've accounted for all of these things that may become distractions. So you want to get rid of them as much as possible. So sit in a way where you're not distracted, away from any distraction. So and a place that's not going to distract you. So there's no good sitting down to dhikr on a really hard floor if all you think about for the next 25 minutes is how much your glutes hurt. It's completely pointless. Yeah. And there's no good also feeling really spiritual that you've done that, because you've just probably wasted half an hour. It'd be much better if you start off on a cushion and work your way down to a floor as you become more comfortable with sitting on harder floors, because it is a comfort thing. Anyone who doesn't ride a bike and has attempted to ride a bike will know this, that all it takes is you go on a 10-minute bike ride for the first time, even if you ride bikes but you haven't for a while. So most of us, when we come out of lockdown, the pain that you feel in those muscles around the upper thigh is just, you'd never expect it. You're just sitting down, and yet there's all this pain there. And not only that, but it hurts for like 2 or 3 days, maybe even longer for some people, because what you're doing is something you haven't done for a while. Your muscles, your body isn't just restricted. It's not used to contracting in that way, and your muscles are not used to being exercised in that way. So, but the second or third time, it settles down, and after about the 7th or 8th time, you're fine with it. So, what you want to do is you want to be sitting in a way that's going to give you as much, so it's as much of a chance to be focused in your dhikr as possible. And then at the same time try to work into your routine being a bit more creating a space for you in your yourself in your home, where it's not so comfortable that you're actually in, you don't want to be worried about the pain in your glutes, but at the same time you don't want to be kind of falling asleep because you've just completely rested into your especially custom designed orthopedic cushion, because that's probably not going to be very useful either. So it's about finding an appropriate balance, but ultimately it's about making sure that you're in a space where you can remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that also applies, by the way, for students who are studying religion. That's also part of the azkar. So I remember, and I shared this with my I've shared with some of my students too, that when I first started studying with my teacher, I went through a bit of a phase where I just decided I didn't want to, my bed was too comfortable. I want to get rid of this, I want to get rid of that, and I'm going to be on a hard floor, and all of these things that went through. And I think there was the josh of being a talib al-ilm was just, it was overwhelming. So I just wanted to be part of that circle now. And then, and I've had people ask me, what was that like? And, and rather than me saying, oh, that was a time, because some of it was brilliant. I mean, I wouldn't change it for the world, but it's not that I wouldn't change it because it was a great spiritual experience. It's more because I loved the time that I was doing it, because I was around good friends. We had a nice community, all the things that makes you want to do anything in life. You're around good people, and you're having fun. I was having fun studying. We spend sometimes all night in the masjid, and somebody on the outside might think, wow, they were spending all night in the masjid. No, we were spending most of that time talking, chilling out and studying, but we were under no illusions that we were doing that. So I didn't come home thinking I did this a great stint in the masjid. I knew full well that if we spent 12 hours in the masjid, at least 6 of those were spent, having a good chat with the boys. So these things definitely I enjoyed. But then there's parts of it, as I said, where I did them, but looking back now, would I do them? Not really, because maybe I think I was following, I was reading about people that did these great things, and I was trying to almost imitate them. And I think imitating a good thing, there's nothing wrong with trying to imitate good people. Absolutely no issues with that whatsoever. But you've also got to be realistic. You've got to be realistic. And there were things I remember that my mum said to me, why are you getting rid of this? You don't need to do that. At the time, I was very, I saw it as it's the right thing to do. But now looking back, or at least when I look at it with myself now, and I think if my son grew up and he was like me and said, I'm getting rid of my bed, I'd say, well, why don't you buy a new one then? Or you should have paid for it if you want to get rid of it, sort of thing. I would have come up with I'm pretty sure, in fact, I will come up with some sort of comment like that if that idea ever crosses his mind. So things that I think about now that at that time I just didn't see it because I was in my own little world. I wasn't considering the fact that somebody bought that bed, but these are the kind of small details which are important in the big picture that you just don't see when you're young. Anyway, وَلَوْ ذَكَرَ عَلَى غَيْرِ هَذِهِ الْأَحْوَالِ جَازَ. But he does make this point. He says, look, if you cannot do it in this state, look, if you're somebody who just needs a good nap, and that's the only time realistically you can start doing a bit of dhikr, knock yourself out. There's nothing wrong with you sitting down and doing a bit of dhikr and falling fast asleep doing it. If that's, because as long as that comes from a good, sincere place, which is that you're trying to use those few minutes to put you to sleep, there's no better way to go to sleep than to do so remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's better than probably going to sleep watching Netflix. So if that's where you need to start, then by all means that's where we should be. If you just start off with maybe at night before we're going to sleep, just spend 2 or 3 minutes, forget the 20 minutes off, and just 2 or 3 minutes just saying a couple of adhkar. And we'll go into a few examples shortly, inshallah. Then try and do them and go to sleep saying those words. And that's a good thing to do. Don't worry about the way you're sitting. Don't worry about am I in wudu or not in wudu. Are my feet facing the Qibla? Those things you don't have to worry about. If your intention is that I want to at least remember God for a couple of minutes before I go to sleep, have the light off, have your eyes closed, have your feet in whatever direction it is, whether you wudu or not wudu. I mean, ideally try and sleep in wudu, but if you're not, don't go out your way to do it if you're trying to create a habit. The key with a habit is start small and be consistent. Do not do something that's going to, the best way to form a habit, right? Take my word for it. The best way to form a habit is to build on an existing habit. Yeah. What you want to do is you want to sneak in something into an existing habit such that it's very unnoticeable. By changing your existing habit routine, you're going to have to start to learn to do a new habit, and that, because that's quite difficult. It's doable, but it's more difficult. So what I mean by that is to try and say a few words before you go to sleep with the light off is you, we all have the same habit of, I mean, the people work differently, but if you're a routine person, you go to sleep roughly around the same time, or at least whatever time you go to sleep, you know that this is the time the lights are off in my head and the actual lights, and it's time for me to go to bed. Just make a point of reminding yourself, well, I'm just going to say, 10 seconds of just saying la ilaha illallah, and just do it even if you're completely exhausted. Let it go and just and fall asleep. Trust me, you've achieved a lot. And when you wake up the next morning, or whenever you do wake up, you will feel better about it. You'll feel good about it. And what will happen is it's easy to build that routine. If you decide, I'm falling asleep, I've got to do this, or I'll do my, I'm going to go do my wudu and face the Qibla and do that. You might do that once, but how are you going to maintain that if you're not used to it? It's very hard to do that because you've created a completely new routine. Very difficult. So start off small, do something really light that's very non-intrusive to your already pre-existing routines. Do that. And if you can do that well, maybe introduce it in the morning. When I wake up, I'm going to make an effort to just say a few words, or not even dhikr in sense of saying a few words. Just make an effort to, I'm going to spend 30 seconds and I'm going to think of one thing that I'm going to try and do good today. One thing, whatever it might be, or I'm going to be present for one thing. When I give salam, I'm going to make sure in that moment I'm going to ask, how are you? And I'm going to try and mean it, because it's easy to say, how are you? Because as a point of habit, the small things, trust me, are things that make the biggest difference. And the Sheikh says, we know that it's not, so anyone who has doubts about this, is it makruh, is it disliked? Am I doing something? Am I being sinful because I'm not in the perfect state? The Sheikh himself says, وَالدَّلِيلُ عَلَىٰ أَدَمِ الْكَرَاهَةِ, the proof that none of this is impermissible, meaning, or even disliked in any way whatsoever. It's not even dislike. Yeah, it's not even dislike to remember God when you're in that. He's going to talk about some of these words that I'm describing here. He actually specifically touches on people who are in a state of nu'as. Nu'as is where somebody is kind of so fatigued and tired, you're basically just about to fall asleep. Yeah, and he says it's not makruh if it's not necessarily makruh to do dhikr in those situations. The Quran tells us that dalil is inna fi khalqis samawati wal ard wa ikhtilafil layli wan nahar la ayatin li ulil albab. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and in the changing of the day and the night, or the night and the day, la ayat li ulil albab, that there are certainly signs for those who possess lub. Lub is this kind of deep understanding. Lub is the intellect. Yeah, but lub actually means not just having the intellect, but it's the source of it. Yeah, in Arabic you come across, there's a word called hub and a word lub. And hub means a seed. Yeah, but it's the source of everything. It's the source of, a seed is what you plant and you grow something from it. So they call the hub or habba. Habba is a seed. But we have this other word, mahabba, which is love, because love is like that. Love is like that seed that grows, and it's the heart, it's the soul, it's the sadr, it's the core of everything. And the same scale, and almost exactly the same, barring one letter, is this word lub, right? So just like you have the word habib, which comes from hub, we have this word labib that comes from lub. And lub is also the center of everything, but this time it's center of everything intellectually. Yeah. And labib is the mental faculties. It's the ability to think and understand. So Allah addresses that. He addresses the heart, you could say, of your mind, the heart of your mind. لآيات لأولي الألباب. And then God says, الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم. Allah says, and they are those who, so who are the ulil albab? Who are the people that have this deep intellect? They are those who remember Allah, meaning they know that God is worthy of remembrance, and they try to spend all their life preparing for the eternal life rather than the temporary life. And if you just think, reflect on that for a second, we are in this world for anywhere between, on average, something like 75 years, and if depending on male or female, that might change, and tops about 120 if you have a particularly long life, a very long life, in fact. So we're looking at anywhere between 75 and 120 years tops, and most people probably won't. Well, most people hit the average somewhere, but there's a lot of people that won't, which means to be a short life. And then if you think about from the moment of so in the grand scheme of things, given that how long creation has been around for, well, it's minimally 6,000 or 7,000 years, minimally. Yeah, absolutely. This is if you were to take someone's like the lowest estimate, regardless of whether it's scientist or religious or whatever, it's not going to be more than 6,000 or 7,000 years. Yeah, and the top estimate would be somewhere in the region of millions of years. Yeah, and then from this point, from our point here to the time when we're resurrected and we stand before Allah, we have absolutely no idea how long that will be. Yeah, but if you go by the maths, so far everyone that's been in the ground hasn't been resurrected yet. The judgment day hasn't come yet. So the chances of judgment day coming within 50 or 60 years of us being in the ground, meaning less time than we've been on this earth, are probably quite low if you were to look at it just purely mathematically. There's a much greater chance that we'll be in there for many centuries. Allahu Alam, but just if you were to be a maths person. And what that means is, from the time of creation to the time of the time that we're resurrected, we're talking, at the highest estimate, we're talking millions of years, and at lowest estimate, we're talking a few thousand years. Either way, 120 years, which is tops for a human being, is a tiny proportion of time that we spend physical, conscious, in our bodies. The vast majority of our existence is in the realm of the spirit. Most of our time will be in the realm of the spirit, be that before we came physically into our body, from the time when Allah asked us, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And we all said, agreed, Bala, you certainly are our Lord. And then, or it be from the time we pass away to the time we're resurrected. Most of our time will be spent not in our physical bodies. So the ulul albab understand that, and the way they do it is just mathematically. Why would you prioritize the very thing that is a glitch in your overall existence? It may be significant. In fact, it's such a small amount, and yet it's so significant. Yeah, it's such a small amount of your time, and yet it's so significant. And to take that small amount of time and do A, which is give it a lot of credit, far too much credit, and B, knowing how significant it is, to misuse it. Yeah. Why would one do those? Why would one do any of those two things if they understand the bigger picture? So Allah refers to people who understand the bigger picture as ulil albab, who've really reflected and have see their place in the world, or at least try to. They are those who remember Allah standing, because when you appreciate that, you remember God qiyam and standing, wa qu'udan and sitting, wa ala junubihim, and when you're lying down, reclining. Yeah. وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, and they take time and reflect on the creation of the heavens and the earth. These are the ulil albab. So what we learn from that is the permissibility, because God tells us the people of lub are the people who remember God standing, sitting, and on their sides. We also have a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, what the Shaykh mentions, so we have a hadith in Sahih Bukhari where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is muttafaq alayhi, actually, it's in Bukhari and it's in Sahih Muslim, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam he says, that Sayyidah Aisha says, يتكئ في حجري وأنا حائض فيقرأ القرآن, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to place his blessed head on the lap of Sayyidah Aisha whilst she was menstruating, and he used to read Quran. So what that tells us, he was actually lying down and reading Quran, or at least leaning and reading Quran. So this idea that somehow leaning on something is not allowed. This hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim said that leaning on something and reading Quran is perfectly acceptable. Well, this is teaching us everything that the Prophet did is teaching us as to what's allowed and what's not allowed, and what's and he did that because he recognized our state and our need for, sometimes we are tired, and reading the Quran is sometimes hard enough to fit into your day, for various reasons, not always valid. Um, but then to have all these constraints attached to it can be very debilitating for a lot of people. Some people can't do it. They need to be able to just relax a bit and lie down and read the Quran. So this is telling us, and Imam Nawawi is telling us, it's perfectly fine for you to do that if that's what you need to do. But I've said a number of times during my classes that actually we should always be ambitious and try and improve. So let's see this as the end goal. Where we want to get to is being the akmalus sifat, to try and put ourselves in the perfect state. What we don't want to do is think we can do it in 2 days, a week, a month, or 6 months. Do not give yourself that sort of restriction. It's far better and far more appropriate and more useful for you practically if you tell yourself, I know what the goal is, so you've got something to aim for. But my goal, my immediate goal is to, number one, start to do something, to do some sort of dhikr, to create add something new in my life. And number two, to maintain it. Yeah, that's a bigger priority than worrying about the goal, is to maintain it. And number three is to incrementally add to it with the intention that I will reach number four. But don't worry about number four. Yeah, this go through that journey of start it, maintain it, and incrementally increase it. And what's your measure of when do I know to increase something? Increase it. I'll give you a simple way of doing it. If you do something consistently for about 6 months, and you desire for at least 1 month to increase it, then by all means increase it. If you've done something for a couple of months or for 6 months, and then you suddenly have this idea to increase it, don't increase it. You need to make sure you need to sit with the need to increase it for some time. Don't just immediately give into that, because what you might do is you don't want to destroy habits. Yeah, so we almost have to treat ourselves as children, to say, okay, you need to prove to yourself that this is something you can cope with. So start teaching start training your nafs. And the first step in that is you've got to treat it like a child, as Sheikh Sajjad has gone through. I'm sure he spoke about in the Burda, the verse, the nafs is katifl, and nafsu tifli, that the nafs is like a child. He wasn't just saying that wasn't a throwaway statement. It really is like a child. So what we've got to do is make sure it really does. When the child says hungry, are you really hungry, or are you going to make something for you and then you're just going to spit it out? Yeah. So you've got to force its hand. So really test yourself and make sure that you can still maintain it. If you have that desire to want to increase whatever it is that you're doing, then also actually apply this test of who's going to be harmed by it and who's going to be benefited by it. And if you can benefit from it, in what sense? Physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, or all of the above. It may be that something spiritually brilliant for you, but psychologically may not be. And we've got to be careful that we don't fall into this trap of anything spiritually good is psychologically good for us. It's not. Yeah, it's not good for you, because the thing is, you have to be in a psychological space to be able to appreciate things spiritually. For example, if somebody has OCD, if they have obsessive compulsive disorder, and they have they get confused in their rak'ahs, when they're praying, they do one, they do two, they do three, and they have this real panic. The solution isn't to make them read nafil all night. That isn't the solution, because what you're gonna do is, by that morning, this person would have not slept, and the chances are, if you leave them in that state, they'll continue in that way, probably stop eating if it's extreme. You're going to cause that person a lot of harm. Yeah. So we've got to make sure that we are balancing these things. What is this spiritually good for me? And the measure for that is, first of all, the Sharia. Is this a good thing to do? Secondly, it's also, what's spiritually good for you sometimes is what hurts a bit. Yeah. I don't particularly want to do it, but I know it's a good thing to do. Yeah. So therefore, what you've done is, you know that ego doesn't play a big part in this. Yeah. It's a very crude way of measuring it, but you know that that's not really because you don't particularly desire to do it. Yeah. But you're going to do it anyway. So what you do, and that's a good way of checking your ego, is constantly just give it a beating. We have to give it a beating every now and again, and that's one way of doing that. So so make sure that you've measured, you've kind of balanced these things out in your mind. And there's no, I mean, we can talk through some of these examples, but really, you know your mind, your heart better than anybody, better than I know it. So ask yourself that, maybe make a small Excel spreadsheet if you're a whiz at Excel, and write down some of these things: physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, family, spouse, mother, father, parents, lifestyle, work, friends, commitments. This is basically what the Prophet ﷺ did. This is exactly what he did. He apportioned his time accordingly, and he said, they are deserving of my time. It's their time, so it's not your time. So when you're deciding to do something, you've got to weigh it up against the people that you owe time to. Yeah. And the person that you are, you owe you time. But by you time, there's you in terms of your spiritual need, your psychological need, your emotional need, and your physical need. And you've got to consider all of those, and that's what makes you who you are. So you've got to consider each of these over any action that it is that you're doing. If you're deciding to start a class in Arabic, then consider these things. What's my purpose? Why am I doing it? How will I manage my home life? How would I do this? How would I do that? And don't get me wrong, your nafs will play a part in this, and it will probably convince you shouldn't do it. And it's not always the right answer, but at least you've considered it. You've got to consider it and make a considered decision. Your nafs isn't going to override you. Yeah, your nafs is just another battle you have, like every other battle. So treat it like just another consideration, and then and I think what we'll do is you'll start making you'll make minimally more informed decisions. Here we'll make more informed decisions that we've spent another an extra day mulling over, rather than leaping into something and then regretting it afterwards. So I'm going to didn't get through a huge amount, but I'm going to stop on that fasal, because the next fasal is he speaks about making sure that whatever you do, dhikr. So ideally, so we're talking about the ideal dhikr now. So we said the ideal dhikr is number one, he says, is to try and be in terms of the way you're sitting, to try and be sitting, facing the Qibla and so on. And then he goes on to tell us, well, it's okay if you're not in those situations. But the second thing he goes on to then is to ensure that you're clean. Yeah, and again, if somebody's not in a in wudu, or even requires ghusl, or somebody's menstruating, none of these things should be inhibitors from you remembering God. Yeah, none of these things are inhibitors from you remembering God. So that's what he goes on to say, which is ideally you want to be in the perfect state, but if you're not, it's no problem. Just whatever state you're in, just go for it. Yeah. There are occasions. So I remember when I used to go to my classes, my teacher, Sheikh Rasul Bak Saidi, he was very particular about the way we dressed, and I was the worst at it. And people who know me from those days will know I used to have this horrendous green jubba, which was completely falling apart. I kid you not, this thing was disintegrating while I was wearing it. And I kept it for years because it was this kind of like this. I like the look. I like that old rugged sort of jubba, which I often didn't know which pocket was had a hold on, which one didn't, which meant I lost things all of the time. But I loved it. I'd walk around with this battered jubba. But my teacher was very particular about these things, and he still is, in terms of how his expectation of how one should look. And you will find this, people have different shuyukh, have a different a take on this. So some shuyukh are very much, you'll see it, even their mannerisms. And there are certain sheikhs that I won't name sheikhs, but you will know of these people who are great teachers, great shuyukh, great men of God, or women of God. And they have a certain way they carry themselves, and they have a certain expectation how people should conduct themselves in front of them, and that works. It's a very Jalali type outlook, which is that it's very firm. It's we should we should be aspirational. So we've got to set a standard as to what people should follow, and that's one madhab. That's one way of looking at it. And the other way of looking at it is where the scholar of the people, yeah. this is the way we dress. We're no different to you. We and I want to connect with you, not on my level, whatever that level may be, but on your level. This is your ground, your territory. And that school essentially says that you guys, I need you more than you need me. Yeah, I need you more than you need me, because you can't be a student without a teacher, but you'll be a very lonely teacher without students. Be a very lonely teacher without students. um, and there is this kind of expectation that when you learn, that you must try and give something back. So there's a need and a want to give something back, which is as my teacher said, when somebody is a teacher, they can't help but teach. And I know that about my teacher. If you ask him a simple question about anything, how do you open a vacuum? I'm just staring at a vacuum now. It's haunting me, this thing that I have to use in a few minutes. So, how do you fix a bathroom, a vacuum? He will explain it to you as though you're in a dars with him. And he will explain it in such a nice way, and it makes it's digestible. And you think, how on earth do you do that? Because he has the mind of a teacher. It's just something that's ingrained inside him. So to not have students is quite painful if you're a teacher, So actually, so that madhab is very much about, I'll do whatever I need to do to connect with somebody so that I can teach, because I need you more than you need me, and I have to answer to God for the time that I've spent. And actually, so having somebody that I can give to means that I have one less answer that I need to give. That's another school of thought. And both of these are perfectly valid, acceptable schools of thought. And I guess in light of what we're talking about here is, also you have people that are aspirational, embody the thing that you want to be, and maybe one day you'll become that thing, dress that way, look that way, do wudu, sit in the company of the righteous, and maybe you'll become righteous, and all of that. And that's great. And Imam Nawawi is telling us that's one school. The way he's setting this out is saying that is definitely aspirational. But at the same time, never let that, for those of you who feel like that's too much, because our psyche is different, our psychology is different, and we're not inspired by it, we're put off by it, which is also the case for a lot of people. Rather than being inspired by somebody in the way they dress, look, they look at it, they can never be that, and it puts you off. So Imam Nawawi gives us the other side, which is, look, you can be this guy, and it's perfectly fine. It's the madhab of the scholars too. The scholars, there were many scholars out there that dressed and looked and behaved. There were scholars of the people, and they were no lesser spiritually than the other people. Yeah. So Imam Nawawi opens this book up to everybody, saying, if you want to be that person, be that person. If you want to be this person, be this person. But all of us agree on one thing, that the journey, the trajectory is upwards, that we all have to go on the spiritual journey, try and improve ourselves, whichever place we're at. I'm going to stop because I'm really delaying this class. Jazakumullah khair for everyone who's left some really nice comments. I really appreciate it, and hopefully it's been beneficial for the rest of you. I apologize if there's been any errors. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.